Hello and welcome to a true discourse, our first look exploring session, looking at another one of these pamphlet texts that we occasionally look at that have some connection. Sometimes we look at direct sources for plays. Sometimes we're looking at just odd ephemera from the early modern period. This is sort of somewhere in between as this is a true discourse declaring the damnable life and death of one Stubbe Peter, a most wicked sorcerer who, in the likeness of wolf, committed many murders, continuing this devilish practice 25 years, killing and devouring men, women, and children. So if that hasn't given you a pretty clear indicator of how grim this potentially could get, that hopefully does. To find out what this true, and I'm sure it's all true, there's no exaggeration in this text whatsoever, are these wonderful readers. Wave to the audience at home, everyone. So yes, Peter Stubbe, however you want to be saying that. His name may change slightly throughout the text. I'm fairly certain there are slightly different variants of this story. So who for the same fact was taken and executed on the 21st of October last past in the town of Bedbur in the City of Collin in Germany. Truly translated, because of course it's a translation, so it's even more true, out of the High Dutch, according to the copy presented in Cologne, brought over into England by George Bore's ordinary post, the 11th day of this present month of June 1590, who did both see and hear the same. So, dating from the early 1590s as a text as well. So that gives us a connection potentially with a whole host of plays from the early modern period. I'm going to go to... who shall I go to first? Alexandra, would you like to start us off on this most true discourse, declaring the life and death of one Stubbe Peter being a most wicked sorcerer? I will
I
basically
would.
nominate people at the end of each paragraph. I'll nominate somebody else to read. So I'll start off with Alexandra.
Those whom the Lord doth leave to follow the imagination of their own hearts, despising his proffered grace, in the end, through the hardness of heart and contempt of his fatherly mercy, they enter the right path to perdition and destruction of body and soul forever, as in this present history in perfect sort may be seen, the strangeness whereof, together with the cruelties committed, and the long time therein continued, may drive many in doubt whether the same be truth or no. And the rather for that sundry false and fabulous matters have heretofore passed in print, which hath wrought much incredulity in the hearts of all men generally, insomuch that nowadays few things do escape, be it never so certain, but that it is embased by the term of a lie, or false report.
Aaron, could I ask you to take up the cudgels?
In the reading of this story, therefore, I do first request reformation of opinion, next patience to peruse it, because it is published for example's sake, and lastly to censure thereof as reason and wisdom doth think convenient, considering the subtlety that Satan useth to work the soul's destruction, and the great matters which the accursed practice of sorcery doth effect, the fruits whereof is death and destruction for ever, and yet in all ages practised by the reprobate and wicked of the earth, some in one sort and some in another, even as the devil giveth promise to perform. But of all other that ever lived, none was comparable unto this hell-hound, whose tyranny and cruelty did well declare he was of his father the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning, whose life and death and most bloody practices the discourse following doth make just report.
Okay, we're going to pause before we get to the just report. There's always a bit of throat clearing, setting up the tone of the text, which is of course turn away from the followers and workers of Satan, which I think is not an unreasonable sentiment, actually. Sometimes with these moralizing things, they can push certain sentiments. I think not following the devil is probably not inherently a terrible idea. Speaking as an atheist, but. So yeah, I think we're getting the sense of the tone of it. But what I'm interested in is, this idea that some people said this, this is definitely not a lie or a false report. This is all true. I love it when they spend a lot of time telling us that something is true, because I always have to ask the question, is it true then? How much of this is true? I'm sure there was a pretty terrible person who did some pretty terrible things, but I also suspect a lot of this may not be accurate. Any additional thoughts from the room at this stage, Alan?
It's giving me vibes of the 1960s News of the World publication. And I was waiting for the line, at this point, your reporter made his excuses and left.
Yes, and I think that idea of that kind of journalism is sort of what this is aiming at. It's not a long text. It's perhaps designed to be read out by a literate person to a room of people of lower rates of literacy, so that they can hear this story told, the most salacious, terrible news from the continent. And it's come over by ordinary post. So it's come over recently. It's hot off the press, as it were. Any additional thoughts? Otherwise, we'll start getting into the meat, as it were. Now, just note on the text, there are some really weirdly spelt names of cities and towns, so just be aware. I think Collin is Cologne pretty straightforwardly, but I don't know what some of the others will be. But we can all go to Collin. I'd like to go to Collin myself. So just say what you see and don't worry about it too much at this stage. Lois, I think I'll ask you to start off with the first paragraph, please.
Okay. In the towns of Sperrat and Bedbur, near to Cologne in High Germany, there was continually brought up and nourished one Stubbe Peter, who from his youth was greatly inclined to evil, and the practicing of wicked arts, even from 12 years of age till 20, and so forwards, till his dying day, insomuch that surfeiting in the damnable desire of magic, necromancy, and sorcery, acquainting himself with many infernal spirits and fiends, insomuch that forgetting the God that made him, and that Saviour that shed his blood for man's redemption, in the end, careless of salvation, gave both body and soul to the devil forever, for small carnal pleasure in this life, that he might be famous and spoken of on earth, though he lost heaven thereby.
And Connor, could I ask you to take up the next paragraph, please?
The devil, who hath a ready ear to listen to the lewd motions of cursed men, promised to give unto him whatsoever his heart desired during his mortal life. Whereupon this valid wretch neither desired riches nor promotion, nor was his fancy satisfied with external or outward pleasure, but having a tyrannous heart and a most cruel, bloody mind. He only requested that as his pleasure he might work his malice on men, women, and children in the shape of some beast, whereby he might live without dread or danger of life, and unknown to be the executioner of any bloody enterprise which he meant to commit.
And Aliki, could I ask you to do the next paragraph, please?
The devil, who saw him a fit instrument to perform mischief as a wicked fiend, pleased with the desire of wrong and destruction, gave unto him a girdle, which being put about him, he was straight transformed into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like unto brands of fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws. And no sooner should he put off the same girdle, but presently he should appear in his former shape, according to the proportion of a man, as if he had never been changed.
Okay, we've got lots of interesting things going on here. We've got the kind of thing that we get in true crime narratives today. I'm starting to think of, he was born a killer. He was born a psychopath. It was innate in him. It's nothing to do with anything to do with external influences. He was born. That seems to be what and the devil. He works with the devil straight away. But the devil does give him a girdle. Gives him a magical artifact which will transform him. And I'm trying to think now of my folklore of this kind of thing. I'm thinking back to Beware the Cat, of the various ways that witches and cats and familiars functioned, and elements like that. What are people getting from the devil here? Thoughts from the room? I've seen stuff in the chat, so I know people's got thoughts. I'm just not gonna say other people's thoughts out loud for them, because you've got them. I know you've got them. Someone wave.
Yeah.
I'm looking at someone specifically. Go on, Sarah.
Well, I'm only going to say what Eric said in the chat, and I don't know why he's being so shy and modest about it. But like, not only are there a lot of Faustus vibes, but yeah, there's he definitely reminds me of, and certainly he reminded Eric of the brother in Malfi. There's a whole there's this sort of lupine thing going on here. That when was this?
1590 is this text. Duchess is much later.
Okay. So I mean, there could have, I mean, he could have potentially read there, but there's this thing of like wolves and devils, which, I mean, I know, like, fairy tales. A lot of fairy tales these days, there's a lot of wolves in them, but that's because we've like inherited the all the work of the Brothers Grimm did in the 19th century. But like, I don't, was this a thing? Were wolves and devils kind of, I'm trying to think of the iconography. Do you get pictures of devils that look like wolves? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there's seems to be a link there.
Yes, Lois and Eric.
Yeah. Well, I think the situation in the Duchess of Malfi is actually a disease called lycanthropia, in which people imagine themselves to be wolves and behave like wolves, which is quite different from actually becoming a wolf with the help of the devil. In The Witch of Edmonton, which we've read, I think there's a devil that takes the form of a dog and that accompanies somebody, but the person doesn't actually become a dog. There's also, if you want a magic girdle, there's one, I think, in Johnson's play, The Sad Shepherd. I can't remember if we've read that one.
Yes,
but
we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did remember there was a girdle somewhere, and I was trying to remember where it was from.
Yeah. Well, it's used. Yeah, it's used quite ingeniously, because whenever somebody's got it, they're supposed to be. They're supposed to look like one thing, and when they haven't got it, they look like something else. And so it allows two actors basically to interchange the role.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, as I say, in Beware the Cat, which again is a prose work, there is a lengthy discussion about how do witches turn into cats, or how do these transformations take place? They get into the question of how does the mass shift work, which is a lovely bit of this question of how do you compress someone down into the size of something that's smaller? I mean, that's quite an important problem of just thermodynamics and mass and energy. I mean, it's positively scientific. So this in this sense gives you some sort of an out. It gives you a bit of sort of magical technology, a girdle, which will do that for you, and that's quite interesting. Eric, then Alan, then Aaron.
Well, I can think of lots of references, like, Norse mythology, where you've got like this sort of, Fenrir, the sort of who's going to bring forth the downfall of the universe, basically, at some point later on in the future or the past, depending on how you look at time. And then you've got sort of, I mean, what I was thinking of was more like selkies and that kind of thing, where you get a magical item that is attached to like a seal coat, basically, or that kind of thing, where you have to put on something to transform into that animal or whatever. And also, I think there was a transformation in Dame Sirith as well, where she turns someone into a female dog.
She claims it doesn't actually happen in real life. It is a lie. Which I'm not suggesting for a second that this isn't untrue. I'm sure this all happened, and it wasn't just some guy killed lots of people. Alan, then Aaron, then Aliki, then we will move on.
Yeah, isn't there quite a lot of strong tradition in Middle Europe of wolf stories? Partly because wolves were still extant much later than they were on the British Isles.
Aaron.
Well, we were talking about what is the history of associating with wolves with devils, and what jumped out at me was that he's chosen the wolf as a safe way to be brutal and beastly. He actually, as if the wolf is just accepted, like, yeah, there's wolves out there, be careful of them. They're natural, and he obviously isn't living somewhere where people like band together and go hunt down wolves if they hear of one nearby. So it seems like we might be a little bit ahead of an association that the wolf is inherently evil, because this guy has said, make me a wolf so that I can practice this in safety, because people will leave him be as a wolf, as just a fact of the world, and not suspect anything.
Yes. Aliki.
Yeah, I think Alan's right that the existence of wolves is part of how you see them. If you live in a place where in a hard winter wolves might attack your village, or in a not so hard winter your flocks, you see them as less benign creatures than we tend to at a greater remove. I was also thinking Eric's point about the selkies. Selkies are not quite human, I think, but there is also a bunch of folklore about swans, in which you throw a feather cloak over a woman and she becomes a swan maiden or something like that. Isn't there's a story with a group of princesses, or a woman and her brothers are turned into swans? Her brothers are turned into swans. Anyway, there's definitely turning into animals via mantle folklore.
Okay, let's find out more of what definitely happened with Stubbe Peter. Lynn, tell us how he was exceedingly well pleased with this.
Okay. Stubbe Peter herewith was exceedingly well pleased, and the shape fitted his fancy and agreed best with his nature, being inclined to blood and cruelty. Therefore, satisfied with this strange and devilish gift, for that it was not troublesome, nor great in carriage, but that it might be hidden in a small room, he proceeded to the execution of sundry most heinous and vile murders. For if any person displeased him, he would incontinent thirst for revenge. And no sooner should they, or any of theirs, walk abroad in the fields or about the city, but in the shape of a wolf, he would presently encounter them, and never rest till he had plucked out their throats and tore their joints asunder. And after he had gotten a taste thereof, he took such pleasure and delight in the shedding of blood, that he would night and day walk the fields and work extreme cruelties.
And Sarah, if you could take up the cudgels, please.
And sundry times he would go through the streets of Cologne, Bedbur, and Sperat in comely habit, and very civilly, as one well known to all the inhabitants thereabouts. And oftentimes was he saluted of those whose friends and children he had butchered, though nothing suspected for the same. In these places, I say, he would walk up and down, and if he could spy either maid, wife, or child that his eyes liked or his heart lusted after, he would wait their issuing out of the city or town. If he could by any means get them alone, he would in the fields ravish them, and after, in his wolvish likeness, cruelly murder them. Yea, often it came to pass that as he walked abroad in the fields, if he chanced to spy a company of maidens playing together, or else a milking of their kine, in his wolfish shape he would incontinent run among them. While the rest escaped by flight, he would be sure to lay hold of one, and after his filthy lust fulfilled, he would murder her presently. Beside, if he had liked or known any of them, look who he had a mind unto, her he would pursue, whether she were before or behind, and take her from the rest, for such was his swiftness of foot while he continued a wolf, that he would outrun the swiftest greyhound in that country. And so much he had practised this wickedness, that the whole province was feared by the cruelty of this bloody and devouring wolf.
And Eric, if you could take up the cudgels, please.
Thus continuing his devilish and damnable deeds within the compass of a few years, he had murdered 13 young children, and 2 goodly young women big with child, tearing the children out of their wombs in most bloody and savage sort, and after eat their hearts panting hot and raw, which he accounted dainty morsels, and best agreeing to his appetite. Moreover, he used many times to kill lambs and kids, and such like beasts, feeding on the same, most raw and bloody, as if he had been a natural wolf indeed, so that all men mistrusted nothing less than this his devilish sorcery. Should I keep going? He had at that time living a fair young damsel to his daughter, after whom he also lusted most unnaturally, and cruelly committed most wicked incest with her, a most gross and vile sin, far surmounting adultery or fornication, though the least of the 3 doth drive the soul into hellfire, except hearty repentance and the great mercy of God.
And Alan, take over, please.
This daughter of his he begot when he was not altogether so wickedly given, who was called by the name of Stubbe Peter, whose beauty and good grace was such as deserved commendations of all those that knew her. And such was his inordinate lust and filthy desire towards her, that he begat a child by her, daily using her as his concubine, but as an insatiate and filthy beast, given over to work evil. With greediness, he also lay by his own sister, frequenting her company long time, even accordingly as the wickedness of his heart led him. Moreover, being on a time sent for to a gossip of his, there to make merry and good cheer, ere he thence departed, he so won the woman by his fair and flattering speech, and so much prevailed, that ere he departed the house, he lay by her, but ever harder had her company at his command. This woman had to name Catherine Trumpin, a woman of tall and comely stature, of exceeding good favour, and one that was well esteemed among her neighbours.
Okay, we'll pause there because there's a lot of crimes being committed here, some of which would stand up in a court of law and some of which I suspect would not. So here is this opening boundary of him going out in wolf form and committing rapine and murder here and there and everywhere. I suspect many of these crimes are potentially very difficult to prove. That these may just be, assuming that these incidents occurred, that they could just be wolf attacks, or they could be separate crimes not necessarily connected, as well as the ones that presumably he was perfectly capable of committing as a human there. And before we go on to the other more social crimes that we'll come on to anon, Sarah.
Yeah, I don't know that whoever wrote this is particularly bothered about the truth of what I mean. You kind of you said it earlier, but the more it goes on, the stronger. I mean, I'm getting strong Sun News of the World. I don't think News of the World exists anymore. But like Sun newspaper, News of the World, like National Enquirer vibes here. I mean, it's there are true crimes and reporting, and there's true crime reporting, and this is like right down at the trashy, salacious, and
yes, National Enquirer, werewolf ate my baby kind of headline.
Yeah, we're right down in that territory. I feel
it's particularly, it's clickbaity as well in that sort of sense too. Of just it's throwing everything at the wall. But I'm sure, many of these things, many of these crimes did actually commit or happen. They just might not, as say, all be attributable or have been exaggerated. Murdered 13 young children. Is that how attested by that is by facts? I do not know. And then we get to the incest section, which we have seen in some drama. It's particularly reminding me of Duck's Maraud, which is a fragmentary morality play, which features a very similar plotline as this. At this point, actually, it doesn't include so much murdering, but definitely does involve this kind of coercion that is in place here. So yes, it's throwing in as much as it can. Alexandra, then Eric.
I resign my turn. Thank you.
Eric.
I was gonna say that the incest is more, well, though I guess that's brother and sister. It's more like, sort of, tis pity she's a whore rather than because like that. But then it's not a father-daughter relationship. It's a brother and sister relationship in the play. But you can kind of see how they would use this kind of material to drift off into similar territory.
It's where you get the impression the author is free associating with whatever morbid fantasies that they have here. It's just incest with his daughter, with his sister. I mean, it's all over the place in terms of where those things are going on, and it's just throwing all those things together. Okay, I'm sure it's going to get more cheerful as we go on. So on that note, Aliki, could you tell us where we are next? His lewd and inordinate lust.
But his lewd and inordinate lust being not satisfied with the company of many concubines, nor his wicked fancy contented with the beauty of any woman, at length the devil sent unto him a wicked spirit in the similitude and likeness of a woman, so fair of face and comely of personage that she resembled rather some heavenly Helen than any mortal creature, so far her beauty exceeded the chiefest sort of women. And with her, as with his heart's delight, he kept company the space of 7 years, though in the end she proved and was found indeed no other than a she-devil. Notwithstanding this lewd sin of lechery did not anything assuage his cruel and bloody mind, but continuing an insatiable bloodsucker, so great was the joy he took therein, that he accounted no day spent in pleasure wherein he had not shed some blood, not respecting so much who he did murder, as how to murder and destroy them, as the matter ensuing doth manifest, which may stand for a special note of a cruel and hard heart.
Alexandra, if you could take up the next paragraph, please.
For having a proper youth to his son, begotten in the flower and strength of his age, the first fruit of his body, in whom he took such joy that he did commonly call him heart's ease. Yet so far his delight in murder exceeded the joy he took in his only son, that thirsting after his blood, on a time he enticed him into the fields, and from thence into a forest hard by, where, making excuse to stay about the necessaries of nature, while the young man went on forward, incontinent in the shape and likeness of a wolf, he encountered his own son, and there most cruelly slew him. Which done, he presently ate the brains out of his head as a most savoury and dainty delicious meat to staunch his greedy appetite, the most monstrous act that ever man heard of, for never was known a wretch from nature so far degenerate.
Aaron, please, next.
Long time he continued this vile and villainous life, sometime in the likeness of a wolf, sometime in the habit of a man, sometime in the towns and cities, and sometimes in the woods and thickets to them adjoining, whereas the Dutch copy maketh mention, He on a time met with 2 men and 1 woman, whom he greatly desired to murder, and the better to bring his devilish purpose to effect, doubting by them to be overmatched, and knowing one of them by name, he used this policy to bring them to their end.
And Lois.
In subtle sort, he conveyed himself far before them in their way, and craftily couched out of their sight. But as soon as they approached near the place where he lay, he called one of them by his name. The party, hearing himself called once or twice by his name, supposing it was some familiar friend that in jesting sort stood out of his sight, went from his company toward the place from whence the voice proceeded, of purpose to see who it was. But he was no sooner entered within the danger of this transformed man, but incontinent he was murdered in that place, the rest of his company staying for him, expecting still his return, but finding his stay overlong. The other man left the woman and went to look for him, by which means the second man was also murdered. The woman then, seeing neither of both return again, in heart suspected that some evil had fallen upon them, and therefore, with all the power she had, she sought to save herself by flight, though which nothing prevailed. For, good soul, she was also soon overtaken by this light-footed wolf, whom, when he had first deflowered, he after most cruelly murdered. The men were after found mangled in the wood, but the woman's body was never after seen, for she, the caitiff, had most ravenously devoured, whose flesh he esteemed both sweet and dainty in taste.
And Connor, if you can do the next paragraph, and then we'll pause.
Thus, this damnable Stubbe Peter lived the term of 25 years, unsuspected to be the author of so many cruel and unnatural murders, in which time he had destroyed and spoiled an unknown number of men and women, children, sheep, lambs, and goats, and other cattle. For when he could not, though through the weariness of people, drew men, women, or children into his danger, then, like a cruel and tyrannous beast, he would work his cruelty on brute beasts in most savage sort, and did act more mischief and cruelty than would be credible, although High Germany hath both been forced to taste the truth thereof.
Okay, pause there. Several things leaping out. Someone's just put in the chat. There are several lifts, direct lifts, from the Faustus narrative at this point. The referencing this spirit who's a bit like Helen of Troy. Do you remember that bit from the book and later the play? It's that bit. But which again just makes us question any of the truth of any of this. And then we get to the end. He did this for 25 years. And this is the bit where also I'm starting to go to the National Enquirer territory, or in fact 14 times, because I'm starting to think that the way they're describing the end is not just murdering of people and disappearing of people, but it's also cattle mutilation. It's the kind of thing that we're starting to say that he's not just a werewolf, it's fitting into the logic of alien abductions and things like that. It's that level of expansionism of the crimes being committed here, beyond the any kind of sort of truth or logic. Aaron, then Aliki.
When we were doing the mystery plays, we talked a bit about the kind of prosperity gospelness, the kind of like you're doing well and God favors you, and there's the author here is doing some work to kind of like justify, well, if this guy's so evil, why does he have a son? Why does he have a daughter? He's like, oh, well, in his youth he was young, and before there's this idea that any goodness that was in his life has to be explained away before we get to the wicked part, because once he became associated with the devil, his entire life should have been cursed and wretched from then on.
Yeah, even though at the very beginning he said he was a wrong 'un from the start, and then it's like it does this volte face and tries to make it sort of work, and it's like, no, actually this story is falling apart before our eyes. Aliki.
Okay, so in various ways, I find this narrative reasonably plausible as a sensationalized description of a serial killer with kind of a psychosexual motives. We've seen things almost as horrible or pretty much as horrible as some of these in the stories of real serial killers who have gone on for some decades undetected in some cases. There are a couple of things that interest me. One is that there are places where the narrative completely contradicts itself, like you said about whether he was eviler as he got older or had been evil from the beginning. One is that I can't fathom how a wolf would have opened somebody's skull to eat the brains. Another is we are told a woman was raped and then killed, but in fact, her body was never found. So we have no idea. Maybe she ran away to another country and never came back again. And the other one that interests me is that the rest of the narrative is pretty brief with its descriptions of the crimes. And then all of a sudden, we have a paragraph and a bit of exactly how he entrapped each of these people and dispatched them. And I wonder if this is the kind of the more recent thing, the thing that he got finally caught for, if we assume that there is a real person behind all of this.
Yes. There may be some clues later on as to some of those discrepancies, but it's true that it does cycle in and zoom in on things where you're going, how do you know that unless he had a diary written under his bed that detailed those things? Lynn.
Yeah, maybe he confessed those details later under torture. But it's like, yeah, there's no way that you would know that. Like, I am struck by the fact that he has a daughter and a son when we get no mention of his wife, the person that gave birth to these. That's really weird. And I'm just going to plagiarize Alexandra, who said in the chat that she thinks what happens, and I agree, is that they had a serial killer in town and a wolf preying on livestock at the same time, and these got conflated in the public imagination. Because wolves don't really attack people preferentially. They go for more vulnerable targets. They're as opportunistic as any animal. So it's like, yeah, they go for little sheep and stuff. Not for humans. Yeah, and as unlikely as it might seem to us now, that it's just like he did this for a decade, 2.5 decades, and nobody figured it out. I mean, psychopaths can be extremely charming. They said everybody liked him. So yeah, they can put on an absolutely irresistibly charismatic act. So they'd be the last person you'd suspect of this kind of thing. And the other thing is, in the US, as is true of many developed nations, 40% of the homicides in this country are open cases. Even now, with modern technology, almost half of the homicides that happen never get solved. So many of those, so we have no idea how many serial murderers there are out there, because law enforcement is not maybe as good at their job as popular media would like us to believe.
It's quite difficult to track people. There is a question about the nature of the population centres where these things are happening. The nature of early modern life makes it's quite difficult to be doing. It's not as anonymous as modern life, modern cities are. So there's an interest, because they mention these cities, and I'm now wondering how big some of these towns and cities are for that kind of logic to fit. We will need to move on, but I'll go briefly to Eric.
What I was going to say is just that I like the list of, like, yes, men, women, children, sheep, lambs, and goats, and other cattle, where it's kind of like, it's like after a crime, they go to the crime scene and find like the little bones of animals and stuff. Or like, when you hear archaeologists talk about like the dig up of, I don't know, a midden or something. And they talk about like finding chicken bones or something, which indicates what the person or persons were eating at the time, and you kind of go, okay, so cool, they ate chicken or whatever. Whereas this is clearly like the CSI all of the time, going through his rubbish, going, yeah, he ate women, children, sheep, whatever. I mean, yeah.
And again, the text is occasionally referencing, this is where the source. This is from the Dutch, text. This is where this comes from. Again, to try and convince us that this is all definitely irrefutable, as opposed to where we are, which is, well, maybe there's some truth in this, but it's underneath an awful lot of stuff. Okay, we need to move on. Sarah, could I ask you to do the next paragraph? The inhabitants of Collin. Please.
By which means the inhabitants of Collin, Bedbur, and Sperat, seeing themselves so grievously endangered, plagued, and molested by this greedy and cruel wolf, wrought continual harm and mischief, insomuch that few or none durst travel to or from those places without good provision of defence, and all for fear of this devouring and fierce wolf. For oftentimes the inhabitants found the arms and legs of dead men, women, and children scattered up and down the fields to their great grief and vexation of heart, knowing the same to be done by that strange and cruel wolf, whom by no means they could take or overcome, so that if any man or woman missed their child, they were out of hope ever to see it again alive, mistrusting straight that the wolf had destroyed it.
And here it is to be noted, a most strange thing which setteth forth the great power and merciful providence of God to the comfort of each Christian heart. Alan, could you take up the text?
There were not long ago certain small children playing in a meadow together, hard by the town, where also some store of kine were feeding, many of them having young calves sucking upon them. Suddenly, among these children comes this wild wolf, running and caught a pretty fine girl by the collar, with intent to pull out her throat. But such was the will of God that he could not pierce the collar of the child's coat, being high and very well stiffened and close clasped about her neck. Therewith, all the sudden great cry of the rest of the children which escaped so amazed the cattle feeding by, that being fearful to be robbed of their young, they altogether came running against the wolf, with such force that he was presently compelled to let go his hold and to run away, to escape the danger of their horns, by which means the child was preserved from death, and God be thanked, remains living at this day.
Lynn, tell us what happens in London.
And that this thing is true, Master Tice Artine, a brewer dwelling in Puddleworth in London, being a man of that country born, and one of good reputation and account, is able to justify, who is near kinsman to this child, and hath from thence twice received letters concerning the same, and for that the first letter did rather drive him into wondering at the act than yielding credit thereunto, he had shortly after, at request of his writing, another letter sent him, whereby he was more fully satisfied. And divers other persons of great credit in London hath in like sort received letters from their friends to the like effect. Likewise, in the towns of Germany aforesaid, continual prayer was used unto God that it would please him to deliver them from the danger of this greedy wolf.
Aaron, carry on the narrative, please.
And although they had practiced all the means that men could devise to take this ravenous beast, yet until the Lord had determined his fall, they could not in any wise prevail. Notwithstanding, they daily continued their purpose, and daily sought to entrap him, and for that intent continually maintained great mastiffs and dogs of much strength to hunt and chase the beast wheresoever they could find him. In the end it pleased God, as they were in readiness and provided to meet with him, that they should espy him in his wolvish likeness, at what time they beset him round about, and most circumspectly set their dogs upon him, in such sort that there was no means to escape, at which advantage they never could get him before. But as the Lord delivered Goliath into the hands of David, so was this wolf brought in danger of these men, who seeing, as I said before, no way to escape the imminent danger, being hardly pursued at the heels presently, he slipped his girdle from about him, whereby the shape of a wolf clean avoided, and he appeared presently in his true shape and likeness, having in his hand a staff as one walking toward the city. But the hunters, whose eyes was steadfastly bent upon the beast, and seeing him in the same place metamorphosed, contrary to their expectation, it wrought a wonderful amazement in their minds. And had it not been that they knew the man so soon as they saw him, they had surely taken the same to have been some devil in a man's likeness. But forasmuch as they knew him to be an ancient dweller in the town, they came unto him, and talking with him, they brought him by communication home to his own house, and finding him to be the man indeed, and no illusion or fantastical motion, they had him incontinent before the magistrates to be examined.
Okay, before we get to the examination, lots of things there. Once again, this attempt to say it's definitely true. Look, we have independent witnesses. We've got letters from abroad that say all of this. Someone in Puddleworth wouldn't lie to us. That would never happen. And we also have witnesses, eyewitnesses to someone transforming from a wolf into a man. So definitely, it's all definitely true. I think we can say that's fine. Aaron, then Eric, then Alexandra.
I'm just kind of delighted that they see him transform and they think, well, it could be a devil taking his shape. Let's see if he's at home. And so they go back to his house and it's like, he's not here, must be the guy. Like, I think that's their investigation.
Well, I think if you are seeing things like that, that's actually not an unreasonable question to ask. Is this, if it can change shape, it could be anyone. It could be changing into him as a sort of supernatural libel, I suppose. Eric.
What I find interesting is that paragraph about there were not long ago certain small children playing in a meadow together, and it feels like it's going to launch into like some horrible crime and stuff. Aside from obviously like the wolf attacking like one of the children, and it just feels like you can really kind of use that as an like in my head I was listening to that and having like sort of I don't know, like really quality horror film music to that, just sort of like gloomy music and what's going to happen and suspense and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like it's not like uninteresting, but it's kind of very thrilling in a horror kind of way.
And then the children are saved by cows, the godly intervention of the cow kind. All praise to our bovine friends. Alexandra, then Lois, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I have a few sort of disparate points to make. One being this thing of, we've been talking in the chat about the veracity of the account, because clearly there are witnesses. There are, the Dutch copy says this about events in High Germany, and a vaguely, probably, possibly German-related man in Puddleworth has had 2 letters about this. And so the sort of the certainty with which the veracity is promoted, I find very contrasting to the actual, information that it is, or what's the word? Yeah, that it's promoting, sources that it's promoting. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the theory that I was making earlier in the chat and Lynn sort of presented, which is this idea that potentially, maybe there was a larger area that had a lot of problems with finding, dead cattle and whatnot, a sort of chupacabra situation where there is no explanation other than it must be, a singular malevolent wild animal, Moby Dick, or it's and clearly that's related to the devil. There's got to be some sort of supernatural influence there, or something even worse. And then they match that problem to the problem of, and also humans having very bad things happening to them, and more than one over the last 25 years. That must also be the wolf. That must also be the wolf. That must also be the wolf. And then we find the wolf, or what we claim to be it, corner it, lose it and find some random dude that we all like, but is sort of suspiciously in the wrong place. Ah, must be the guy. Not to say that, of course, it can't be that there was genuinely, that this person was genuinely committing some horrible, horrible things and eventually got caught. But it's also, it feels like a big conflation of, once they actually caught him, a big conflation of all the bad things that have happened in, this 100-mile radius, we can pin on you.
Lois, and then very briefly, Aaron, but we must move on.
Oh, well, this was just a minor point anyway. It was about the wolf trying to bite into this girl and carry her off. And she, apparently the collar of what she was wearing was so thick and stiff. Just an interesting costume note at how they dressed children.
And Aaron.
I like Alexandra's take. I could also see, though, someone who, a serial killer who earlier in their career, the MO is to make things look like animal attacks, and then getting sloppier and sloppier and sloppier until at the end they're caught. And then someone picks up on this and thinks, but what if he really was a wolf when he did it? I can kind of see it going either way.
And maybe he was wearing some sort of semi-wolf disguise that falls off. So, maybe a furry pelt that fell off, and so there's just enough plausible to that. Very briefly, Lois.
Yeah, actually, outlaws were sometimes called wolf's hoods, weren't they? Because I think they did wear something like that.
So maybe there's a whole twisty turniness to this. Anyway, we will find out what happens now he's been caught. Connor, tell us about the things having been apprehended.
Thus being apprehended, he was shortly after put into the rack in the town of Bedbur, but fearing the torture, he voluntarily confessed his whole life and made known the villainies which he had committed for the space of 25 years. Also, he confessed how by sorcery he procured of the devil a girdle, which being put on, he forthwith became a wolf. Which girdle at his apprehension, he confessed he cast it off into a certain valley and there left it, which when the magistrates heard, they sent to the valley for it. But at their coming found nothing at all, for it may be supposed that it was gone to the devil from whence it came, so that it was not to be found. For the devil, having brought the wretch to all the shame he could, left him to endure the torments which his deeds deserved.
And Aliki, take up the cudgels, please.
After he had some space been imprisoned, the magistrates found out through due examination of the matter that his daughter Stubbe Peter and his gossip Catherine Trompin were both accessory to diverse murders committed, who for the same as also for their lewd life otherwise committed, was arraigned and with Stubbe Peter condemned, and their several judgments pronounced the 28th of October, 1589, in this manner. That is to say, Stubbe Peter, as a principal malefactor, was judged first to have his body laid on a wheel, and with red-hot burning pincers in 10 several places to have the flesh pulled off from the bones. After that, his legs and arms to be broken with a wooden are or hatchet, axe?
I think that's an axe, yeah.
The wooden axe or hatchet, afterward to have his head struck from his body, then to have his carcass burned to ashes.
And Lois, take us further, please.
Also, his daughter and his gossip were judged to be burned quick to ashes the same time and day with the carcass of the aforesaid Stubbe Peter, and on the 31st of the same month they suffered death accordingly in the town of Bedbur, in the presence of many peers and princes of Germany. Thus, gentle reader, have I set down the true discourse of this wicked man, Stubbe Peter, which I desire to be a warning to all sorcerers and witches which unlawfully follow their own devilish imagination to the utter ruin and destruction of their souls eternally, from which wicked and damnable practice I beseech God keep all good men, and from the cruelty of their wicked hearts. Amen.
After the execution, there was, by the advice of the magistrates of the town of Bedbur, a high pole set up and strongly framed, which first went through the wheel whereon he was broken, whereunto it was fastened. After that, a little above the wheel, the likeness of a wolf was framed in wood, to show unto all men the shape wherein he executed those cruelties. Over that, on the top of the stake, the sorcerer's head itself was set up. Around about the wheel there hung, as it were, 16 pieces of wood about a yard in length, which represented the 16 persons that was perfectly known to be murdered by him, and the same ordained to stand there for the continual monument to all ensuing ages, while the murders by Stubbe Peter was committed, with the order of his judgment, as this picture doth more plainly express. Witnesses that this is true: Tice Artine, William Broward, Adolf George Bors, with diverse others that have seen the same. So our Puddleworth companions are once again given there as a witness. Okay. Did they need to burn his women folk? Wow. Wasn't expecting that bit. Aliki.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and we see this with attested serial killer cases, that when men and women murder together, or when men, abusive, controlling, murderous men, coerce the women in their lives, because it's often that, into killing with them, the woman comes in for almost as much, if not as much, and sometimes more hatred than the man, because it feels kind of more unnatural to us.
It doesn't feel like this has presented any real case that they were in any way really associated with those crimes at all that he is alleged to have done within the authority. And again, we get to the bit about the girdle, because this is all coming from his free and voluntary confession after having just been shown the instruments of torture. But it mentions, oh yes, the girdle. There was a girdle, but it's magically disappeared. So the reason why you didn't find it was magic. So it's like, I don't think you can put a magic non-existent girdle into evidence. I think that's quite dubious. Aaron.
But doesn't the fact that it disappeared by magic indicate how sinister the crimes were?
Absolutely, yes. That's the logic the text is trying to push on us here, and I'm not buying it, because one of the situations here is it could be that this man just confessed to a load of nonsense, and that none of we have the attested that there were 16 people killed by him, so it could be that he killed up to somewhere in that region of people, and all the rest of it is extrapolation, and actually there was more evidence, and we're just not seeing it from this text. But the fact that the text spends so much time just saying, "Look, it's got to be true. I've got sources," suggests that even the author, or at least the translator, is going, "Is anyone going to buy this if I don't constantly say it's definitely true? I've got sources," because it's Lynn and Aliki.
Yeah, the author is working really hard here to fit this narrative into the Christian worldview. Like, wasn't it a miracle that that little girl escaped a wolf attack? But he carried on murdering people for 25 years. Like, I'm not buying your cosmology, dude.
Aliki.
Yeah, Lynn was talking before about how charming psychopaths can be, and I think they can also be arrogant. Supposing that there was somebody who had murdered a few people who was caught, maybe he confessed to a lot more stuff than he actually did, just for the pleasure of horrifying and amazing his interrogators.
Aaron.
Kind of an extension of what I was asking in the chat. Is this meant to be whimsy? Is this more of like a ghost story, a Penny Dreadful, a dark story that we're in on, or is this supposed to be National Enquirer, as we've been saying, that you should believe that this is the world that you're living in. Is there any indication of that in the record?
Go to Lois. I have thoughts on that, but
yeah, I think there was general sort of. I mean, there was real belief in the devil and power of evil. The thing about this pamphlet is that it's. I was sort of expecting somehow that this was going to be one of these things that's really so funny because it's so ghoulish and so awful, and I'm going to make your flesh creep kind of thing. And in fact, it is really quite horrible, and it's not funny at all. The German text, as far as I could see, of his supposed confession is just one of those what they call the last good night type of ballad that I think several cultures have this, where it's put into the mouth of somebody about to be executed, confessing his crimes. But as it's a ballad, it's clearly not written, I would have thought 99% of the cases anyway, by the person it's attributed to. It's usually sold afterwards. I don't know. I find this pretty creepy.
Oh yeah, and this is the thing, is that this is how that's sort of how true crime narratives function. Is actually that there is something actually very dodgy about so much of true crime writing that is running down this sensationalist gauntlet and quite happy to exaggerate and run with things that are completely untrue and therefore obscure the really true evil things that are going on in this text. But the potential here is also that there is a miscarriage of justice going on, that several people are being burnt because of possibly even hysteria in a local population that is not actually connected. I think there are lots of people who would lap this up and absolutely just gorge on its grotesquerie and its nastiness, but just not in a very healthy way. We are going to wind down, so keep these things brief. Lynn.
In kind of response to Aaron's question, I mean, this is 1589, 1590. This is pre-Enlightenment, pre-modern science, pre-modern skepticism. I think we're meant to buy it. I think we're meant to believe it as mostly literally true, if not 100% literally true. This is a lesson in how evil, like the devil is evil and God is good, and
so we open with this sort of homily at the beginning to say that this is true. It presents lots of evidence, and of course when talking about the nature of confession, especially as you're going to execution, and a certain kind of repentance, of course it's very important for the state and for the church to demonstrate repentance, because that's saying you're going to go, this God is just, and the everything is out in the open, and that's an important element of these texts, is to say that justice has been done in the end despite the work of Satan. Eric, then Alan, then Lois, and then we must close this fairly quickly.
What I was going to say is, what I'm intrigued by is the fact that this happened in Germany or the Netherlands, but someone felt it important enough to be translated. I mean, whether or not it's a ballad or fictional or real doesn't really matter, but someone felt it would have enough of an impact to sort of translate it from Dutch into English and then sell it at the sign of the vine or whatever I think that's what it says. So it's kind of I'm just impressed that clearly it must have been something quite how do you go, like, look how evil this person is for killing so many people, and for kind of the way we deal with serial killers nowadays, whether or not they're like sort of cannibals or otherwise.
And the nature of these crimes are so much that there is a monument built. And again, is this true? Alan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the German setting does make me think, oh, these are foreigners, dreadful people, can't have anything to do, because you're only, a year or so after the Armada. So let's have a pop at the foreigners. The whole thing has got to me a bit of a vibe of double plus ungood prole feed. And I do have a cynical wonder as to what was the bigger domestic political story that was being covered up while attention was being devoted to this.
I think we only have room for so many conspiracy theories within this text. I think that's highly unlikely. I think this is just someone looking for a quick buck. There's a market for it, and you can go for it. I doubt anyone high up gives us stuff about it. Was Lois? Was somebody else?
Well, I was just going to say two things. One that the confession. I mean, once somebody knows that they've confessed to something and they're going to be killed and executed anyway, they might as well go on confessing. I mean, they have nothing to lose. So if people keep saying, "Did you also do this?" Yeah, oh yes, yes. The other thing is that, of course, we've read Eastward Ho, and there is a parody of the sort of Last Good Night type ballad there that Quicksilver has the bright idea of writing it before he's to be executed, and it's sung, and everybody's so sorry for him that he gets out of jail.
Alexandra, I think, and then I'm closing.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that at least as far as I can dig up, there is a historical individual.
Oh, yeah.
So the names are well researched, and this is a person who, along with indeed the daughter and the mistress, got very vilely executed at a time when there was quite a lot there was quite a witchcraft scare. So the idea of this is sorcery, this is devilry, the women are involved, and women are more prone to be witches, so that must be a thing, let's not examine it. And the thing that Rob was saying about potentially there might have been some mass hysteria going on, I think it all links together in a historical context that we, as the much later reader, don't have so much of a relationship to, as to really get into how potentially in Britain as well, reading these pamphlets in the next year, people might be taking it as very immediate news about very bad things that are going on in the world that is quite close to us. Lois pointed out in the chat that Dutch is probably to be read for Deutsch, and so German. So this idea of the world is coming to an end, or we are in a very dangerous place and Satan is attacking now, I think is a color to it that we're not privy to, but that must have made it been part of what made it so sensational and so immediate.
Well, that's all we have time for this true discourse of Stubbe Peter. All that remains to thank all the wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Don't have nightmares out there, and goodbye. Forced to taste the truth thereof.